The NFL is a juggernaut of a sports league, bringing in billions of dollars a year. The franchises rank amongst the most valuable sports teams in the world, and it seems like everything they do ends up with mountains of cash for investors. With that being said, there is an insanely long list of people clamoring to get the chance to own an NFL franchise, and with Roger Goodell confirming expansion is on the horizon, we at FootballLore wanted to make a video going over some of the most likely destinations for upcoming NFL expansion teams. If your city doesn't make the list, it doesn't mean we think it's a garbage heap like Cleveland. It just means the metro market might not be ideal to support an NFL team. The first city I wanted to talk about is Austin, Texas. Austin has been one of the fastest growing American cities for the last decade. Its population has boomed, and it's now home to over 2.4 million people in its metro area. It is far enough removed from Houston and Dallas to be its own distinct market, and considering that most states the size of Texas are able to support 3 NFL teams, it could be a good spot for expansion. Texas is a huge football state, with it being a mainstay of the culture, and even high school football regularly being attended by thousands of people. I don't think it would be hard for them to garner support. I also think Austin culturally is a bit different than Dallas and Houston, which would give it a unique fan base. Competing with a franchise like the Cowboys is always going to be an uphill battle, but I do think Austin could make it work. San Antonio being just an hour away also means it would probably absorb most of that market too. Pretty much whatever this team ended up being would represent the central southern portion of the state. If you include San Antonio in the population count for Austin, it becomes an even more impressive 5.2 million. For comparison, the entire Cincinnati metropolitan has just 2.2 million inhabitants. This team would instantly have one of the largest markets in the NFL, in a state with a history of supporting professional football. There are a few potential downsides in this market though. For example, as far as football goes in Texas, UT in Austin is always going to be the most popular football team in the city. Sure, I think that the NFL would have huge support, but Texas football on Saturday is more of a religion than it is entertainment in Austin. This could be a potential benefit if they had a lot of crossover fans, but playing second fiddle to a college team is something some potential owners would be turned off by. It also would have to get past Jerry Jones, who notoriously hates having to share his market with anyone. Even when the Houston Texans came back, he was not thrilled about having to share the state once more. Unfortunately for all NFL fans, Jerry Jones has a ton of pull when it comes to league meetings. As the owner of the most valuable NFL franchise, he has a lot of influence when it comes to league decisions. I could see a situation where he doesn't want to have to compete with Austin for fans and could put a stop to it. However, the NFL has to realize that Austin is an incredibly fast-growing market with a ton of potential upside. Having a team in that market could spell billions in revenue, but another potential issue is that Texas is a state they feel they have cornered. Sure, they would make more money with another team, but it's not like Texas has a large population of people who would suddenly become NFL fans with another team. As far as stadiums go, they would probably need to build a new stadium. I don't see the college wanting to share theirs, and honestly, it doesn't make a ton of sense as an NFL venue. The good thing about Austin is that since it's booming with real estate development, it probably wouldn't be hard to get someone to step up and fund the project privately. The Q2 stadium is solid, but also wouldn't make sense for an NFL team. Chances are the city would love to have a few billion poured into the downtown to develop a stadium and entertainment center to bring tourists in and boost the economy. Overall, I think Austin is on the short list of cities that would be considered by the NFL. It's growing quickly and has the population to easily support an NFL team. The culture already likes football, and they know they can succeed in Texas because they've managed to do it twice already. If anything, it's surprising there already isn't a third NFL team in the state. Alright, Austin is cool, but our next city would make the NFL go international. They have already said multiple times that they eventually want to take the league global. I do think the easiest way to test the international market wouldn't be London or Mexico, but rather our neighbors to the Great White North. Toronto would make a great spot to put the first international NFL team. It wouldn't really make travel much more complicated than it currently is, and the market already is willing to support a professional football league. It also helps that other leagues that have have done international play already have used Toronto and found success. The NBA, MLS, and MLB have had success with Toronto expansions, and the NHL also has done it since the beginning. It has an English-speaking population of over 6.7 million and is willing to shell out money to build facilities for incoming teams as well. Canada makes a lot of sense to test international expansion, and while I think eventually we will see teams in Europe or Mexico, it makes more sense to start here. While Europe is pretty untested when it comes to pro football other than NFL Europe and small country leagues, Canada is also already home to the second biggest professional football league in the world. The CFL may not be on par with the NFL product, but people in Toronto are familiar with the sport and support the Argonauts already. Sure, this could lead to potential problems when it comes to drumming up fan support because the sports have slightly different rules, but you know there is an appetite for pro football. It also is incredibly close for travel. I mean, Detroit could literally drive to Toronto games if they wanted to. The biggest roadblocks when it comes to Toronto is the currency change, the Buffalo Bills, and the lack of a stadium. The Canadian dollar is worth substantially less than the American dollar, and this leads to some issues with ticket prices and merchandise costs for international leagues. You have to charge Canadians quite a bit more to keep profits in line with league standards, which makes it hard to drum up a lot of fan support, especially if the population isn't stoked for the team in the first place. The Buffalo Bills are also just across the lake from Toronto and currently have the market as a part of their territory. They would have to sign off on a Toronto edition, and it's not like they are going to be happy giving up a metro market with 6.7 million people. Even if they somehow gave it up, the Toronto market would still need to build a stadium to support an NFL team. Chances are it would have to be a dome due to the weather, which would easily send the cost into the billions. Combine that with the dollar conversion, and there is a good chance it could cost the city $2.5 to $3 billion. That is a hefty investment for an unproven league in the country. Sure, the NFL is huge, but that is still a bit of a gamble. I do think if the NFL really does have its eyes on international play, eventually they're going to have to bite the bullet at some point, but at least this way they avoid a lot of the headache that comes with expanding into Europe or Mexico. They know football works in the nation, and there isn't a language barrier or giant oceans preventing players from wanting to sign to those teams. Toronto would be a layup, but I think a solid runner-up in Canada would be Vancouver, even though that would probably not be approved by the Seahawks considering the proximity to the city. Our next city I want to discuss is one that lost its NFL team, but honestly is a perfect market for another expansion, San Diego. San Diego has a population of over 3 million in its metropolitan area and is far enough from LA to have its own distinct culture. I used to visit this city often, and when the Chargers were still located there, it wasn't uncommon to see their merch and games in every bar in the city. The city isn't one who was refusing to build a new stadium, and the Chargers weren't struggling heavily with attendance until they announced their move. The Chargers leaving San Diego has always been puzzling to me. They really left the market to go play second fiddle to the Rams. I know a lot of people in San Diego refuse to cheer for the Chargers ever since they abandoned the city, and I can't really blame them. They had offered to cover hundreds of millions of dollars towards a new stadium, and their owner already was pretty unpopular even before announcing the move. By bringing a new NFL team back, they would be able to recapture some of the market that has been turned off to the league by the actions of Dean Spanos. I also think this is a strategic move towards more international support. San Diego is just across the border from Tijuana, and the metro areas are even calculated together for certain studies. Putting a new team in San Diego would gain some support just across the border and potentially set the stage for a future Mexican NFL team. They would need to build a new stadium, but as I said, the city is willing to do this. Sure, they won't front the entire cost of the build, but there are tons of people who would be willing to build a huge stadium in Southern California, especially if it had some serious taxpayer funding behind it. I do think if the NFL returns to San Diego, it needs to be an expansion team. I feel like the market would not support a relocation the same way they would a new team. There have been rumors the Saints have looked into moving to San Diego, and while the San Diego Saints does sound good, there is something to be said for creating a new team in such a large market. Overall, they definitely have the population to support a team, and in the past have supported an NFL team as well. In my mind, San Diego is a no-brainer. Sure, there is some bad blood from the population, but it's not like St. Louis where there were huge lawsuits against the league for the team moving. As far as relocations go, they did allow the Chargers to move pretty easily. It's not like the league is sitting there thinking San Diego would be a terrible city to do business in. I think the Chargers would definitely be upset about a new team in their old market. But Dean Spanos is honestly one of the worst owners in the league, and I don't think the other owners would care that much if it meant the league would be growing. I could see them adding the San Diego Seals in the next round of expansion. It also helps that San Diego really does not have a lot of professional teams anymore. The Padres and MLS team is all that is left. The NFL would be able to come in and be the third professional team in the city again, so they wouldn't be splitting the fan base with as many leagues as a city like LA. I think they would do incredibly well, and I could even see old Chargers fans going hard for this team purely out of spite for how they were treated by Dean Spanos while he was running the team in the city. The next city is one I see brought up a lot, and while it's definitely possible, I do think there are some huge headwinds working against it. Portland, Oregon is one of the biggest metro areas in the country that does not have a professional football team. It's home to over 2.5 million people, an NBA team, an MLS team, and two incredibly popular college football teams. Many people think it would be a no-brainer to put a team here. There isn't really anything on the coast as far as NFL teams go. Between San Francisco and Seattle and Portland would help fill the gap. This may sound great on paper, but there are a lot of things working against Portland. The first is that the city really is not in a position to fund a new stadium. They don't tend to be the type of city to just hand out money to huge leagues for them to make profit. They also are technically no longer growing as a market. For the last few years, Portland has actually seen a decrease in their population. This makes raising taxes to build a new stadium unlikely to be incredibly popular, and politicians are going to look out for their own re-election rather than the NFL. The city of Portland is very unique in its culture and isn't really known for being a die-hard football city. If anything, the counterculture nature of Portland would lead to their NFL team being ridiculed by the city. I also think as far as states that are easy to do business in, Oregon isn't at the top of the list. New York and California are equally hard to do business in, but come with the largest populations in the country and the biggest markets. The NFL is unlikely to want to jump through hoops the way Portland would ask them to for a market of their size. Oregon isn't really a state that is attractive to business owners at the moment, and this combined with a low likelihood of the city helping build a new stadium makes it not that attractive to NFL teams. I know the Trailblazers have a lot of support, and I'm not saying everyone in Portland hates sports and loves to drink craft brewed coffee, but the market doesn't exactly scream NFL. I also think the Seahawks have a lot of popularity in the region as the representative of the Pacific Northwest. An addition in Portland would cut into their market, and I could see it being as equally difficult as dealing with the Bills if they wanted to expand into Toronto. It's not like the NFL wants owners to be unhappy and fight against them. Portland might just not be worth the fight. If they were lining up begging for an NFL team and willing to bend over backwards for it, that would be one thing, but they're not. And the NFL has a huge uphill battle to get a team in Portland if that is really the direction they want to go. Alright, next I want to turn our vision to Europe. It is no secret that the NFL really wants to expand internationally, and there are a few cities that already sell out games during the few games a year the NFL plays in their market. The biggest hurdle for any team on a different continent is how hard it would be for travel and player relocation. Players aren't going to want to uproot their life in America to go play in Frankfurt. They will if they have to, but it won't be popular. It also would be a nightmare for scheduling. You would have to fly entire divisions across the ocean to play a few games after dealing with jet lag. It would be expensive and it would take forever. With that being said, if the NFL is going this direction, it makes the most sense for them to add an entire division in Europe to ease scheduling. If there were 4 teams in Europe, then it would be much easier for scheduling, and it would cut down on travel costs a lot. If they go this route, then there are 4 cities that I think make the most sense, and the first is the most obvious. London already has been hosting a few NFL games a year and gaining more support each time. There are people in London that are huge fans of the league and plan their entire year around going to the games. It has a massive population, developed economy, and has no language barrier between the local population and the team. London is one one of the biggest cities in the world with over 15 million people. That means even if they managed to just get 30% of the city to support them, it would still be the equivalent of 2 Portland franchises. The nation has a long history of die-hard support for sports. It's no secret that the Premier League is amongst the most heavily supported leagues in the world. Their celebrations and traditions would bring a ton to the league, and I think it would be profitable for the new owner rather quickly. The NFL playing games in London every year is clearly them trying to develop fans in the market, so when they eventually add an expansion, they aren't starting from scratch. I even think the failed NFL Europe was them trying to get an idea of how receptive the market could be to American football. The rivalries would be insane too. Every time the Patriots played the team from London, we would be posting T Harbor memes like never before. They already have a capable stadium, and while the NFL would probably want a new one, it's not like they couldn't play in the current stadium for a few years while it was being built. One huge benefit of London is that it is the wealth capital of the UK, and getting property developed or funding would be no issue for something as profitable as the NFL. If they are going to do a European expansion, then London is 100% a shoo-in. I think they would do a whole division, but this one is a no-brainer for international expansion. The next city is also one that I think the NFL has already been setting up for an eventual expansion, Frankfurt. Frankfurt in Germany is the second largest metro area in the nation. It has a population of nearly 6 million and has had NFL games in 2023 that sold over 50,000 tickets for both games. Frankfurt is the hub of American football in Germany and even has small youth leagues with dedicated support. There is a connection to American culture because there were military bases in the region for decades after the war, and they also have a die-hard sports culture similar to the UK when it comes to supporting their teams. It's one of the wealthiest regions in Germany and also has one of the highest percentages of English speakers in Germany. All of those things make it appealing to the NFL, especially since they already have stadiums capable of hosting games. I think Germany would actually be on the receiving end of 2 teams with an NFL Europe expansion because they also have been playing games in Munich. Those have had a similar level of support, and Munich has 6 million inhabitants of its own. Germany has the population and several large cities that could support a team and has the largest domestic support for American football already. Munich and Frankfurt both would be easy guesses as far as NFL expansion goes, but the 4th city that would be chosen is more up in the air. In my personal opinion, I could see them picking a market like Barcelona or Madrid, purely because they also have stated their plans to expand into Mexico, so they would have been investing in Spanish language production already. It would be an easy way to just expand into another corner of Europe with a language barrier you already partly understand. Outside of that, I don't really see Paris being receptive to an NFL team, and Italy just doesn't have the economic power it used to justify putting a team in the region. If a Nordic country popped up and offered a spot, I could see them jumping at somewhere like Stockholm or Oslo, but realistically, I think Spain would make the most sense for the 4th team. Staying on the international side, I want to bring us back to North America and talk about Mexico. The NFL has played games in Mexico City for years, and they have done incredibly well when it comes to ticket sales anytime they play there. I do think the altitude of Mexico City could cause problems, and overall, I think it would be less attractive to free agents and players than a city in the United States would be. It's unfortunate that Mexico City has such an issue with crime, and I think the NFL would be forced to look elsewhere when it comes to a Mexico expansion purely based on the altitude and safety concerns alone. That doesn't mean Mexico is written off the list entirely. I think a city like Monterrey that is known for being an enclave of wealth and safer than Mexico City could be a great location. They already have the most popular American football team in Mexico, and while a new stadium would definitely have to be built, they have a solid middle class that could afford to support a team. It has a population of over 5 million in its metro area, and while that is substantially lower than Mexico City, the advantage Monterrey has comes in its average income. It's home to the most expensive neighborhoods in Mexico and has a higher average income per person than Mexico City. I think the NFL could easily expand south of the border into Mexico, especially in Monterrey. However, with any NFL international teams, getting high-quality free agents is going to be difficult. The last thing the NFL wants to do is add new teams and then have them suck for decades because the best players don't want to live in another country. There would need to probably be incentives and bonuses paid to players who are willing to live in Europe or Mexico. Obviously, some players would just be grateful to have a roster spot, but star players who can demand huge pay anywhere are probably going to want to stay stateside otherwise. The biggest uphill battle for the NFL in Mexico and Europe would be competing with soccer domestically. Soccer has a stranglehold on all of these markets as far as sports is concerned right now. The NFL is not used to having to compete to be the biggest game in town. They would be in a situation where they'd be fighting for market share in a way they haven't had to do for half a century. It would be a learning curve for sure, but they are beginning to reach market saturation domestically and need to look to international expansion to really secure their future in the long term. Those are the most likely cities when it comes to international expansion, in my opinion. If I was the NFL, I would start with Canada and then Mexico before moving into Europe. However, it looks like the NFL is really focusing their international attention in Europe and also have announced a game in Brazil this year. I do think Brazil is a very long-term play, and the only way that would make sense is if they slowly built their division down Central America into South America to build out more divisions. Expanding straight into Rio doesn't make sense to me personally, but I also am not in charge of the league. I do think there are some more cities within the United States worth talking about, especially some that are rapidly growing markets that haven't been in NFL conversation before. Salt Lake City is quickly becoming a city with several major sports franchises. They just got an NHL team, they have the Utah Jazz, and are willing to spend billions building arenas. One of the biggest things when it comes to being attractive as a destination is giving tax breaks to the league to incentivize them to come. Salt Lake City has been incredibly accommodating to the NHL and NBA, and are willing to come to the negotiating table with any terms. They do have a smaller population with just 1.2 million in the metro, but it's the only city in Utah that is capable of hosting a team. This means they would probably gain a vast majority of the support in the area. I think as far as quickly growing markets go, Salt Lake City still has a large potential upside. It would be like an investment for the NFL to put a team here now. It might not make the most sense today, but I do believe in the long run, Salt Lake City will be a destination for all major sports leagues. They are just way too willing to work with leagues and develop stadiums to not eventually end up with a team. They have managed to gain a ton of support for their local college football teams too. Both the Cougars and the Utes have become respectable programs that have tons of fans locally. They have proven they can support a major sports league and shown they have an appetite for football as well. As for stadium locations, they do have a ton of land outside of the city that is ripe for development, and they would probably need to build a dome just because it gets cold enough in Salt Lake City for them to host the Winter Olympics. I know some teams love playing outside in the snow, but I feel like from now, most teams in cold environments are going to prioritize a domed stadium. Any team in Salt Lake City would also become the de facto NFL team for anyone Mormon who's into football, which would give them some support outside of the immediate metro as well. The potential headwinds going against Salt Lake City is that they really aren't a mega city when it comes to population. Sure, they might be the only major city in Utah, but even the entire state of Utah has a population of just 3.2 million. Over a third of the entire state lives in just one city. They also are close to the Broncos, who kinda currently hold the title of West Coast Mountain Team. I do think Salt Lake City is distinct enough to handle its own team, but most owners are not going to want to willingly give up a major market they have control over. Thankfully, the city is aware they aren't a huge population hub and are willing to do what they need to do in order to make sports work in the city. The only request I have if Salt Lake gets a team is that they don't let the fans name it. I don't know what type of boring food they eat in Utah, but naming your NHL team the Utah Hockey Club is lame. That is Washington football team levels of branding, and I swear if there is a new trend of teams just having stupid boring names, I am going to be upset. Maybe they can go ahead and be called the Salt Lake City Soakers just to really embrace the local culture in the area. Next up, I want to talk about Virginia Beach. Virginia Beach and the surrounding Norfolk and Newport areas have a population of almost 2 million. The thing that makes this especially interesting from an expansion perspective is that they don't currently have any major sports teams in their market. The entire state of Virginia doesn't have any of the major 4 sports leagues, and it remains one of the largest markets that isn't served by any professional sports organization. I know that they usually just assume that people from this area will cheer for the DC teams, but I think it's large enough to deserve its own team. They would definitely need to construct a new stadium for this to happen, and considering the city hasn't really shown any signs they want to spend billions of dollars building a stadium, it's not clear how likely this would really be. The population is very supportive of sports in general, and some of their minor league teams rank amongst the best for attendance in their own leagues. I also think Virginia Beach would benefit from the tourist effect the same way the Raiders currently do. Virginia Beach is a resort town with the longest pleasure beach in the United States. I could see people making a trip and adding an NFL game to their itinerary as a bonus. I can respect that opinion. There are more important things to spend taxpayer dollars on than a billionaire's new stadium. On the other hand, though, there are a lot of cities lining up to bend over backwards and give the NFL whatever they want in order to secure a team. The league would much rather move somewhere that will build them a stadium for free, give them tax breaks, and then kiss their feet compared to somewhere that wants them to pay their own way. Is that the most fair thing in the world? No, not really. But when you're the NFL, it's just the reality of the situation. Cities will give you billions for free, and it makes no sense to not take advantage of that. Another city I want to talk about in this video is one that seems literally designed to have been an NFL franchise in the past. Oklahoma City. When you think about it, it's really surprising there is no team in OKC. They have a passionate sports fan base in general, especially for college football. They have a solid population. They have shown they can support a professional sports team, and they have been willing to build sports venues for other leagues before. The Midwest and Southern United States is football's heartland, and it's surprising we don't have more teams in the area between Denver and Nashville. OKC has a population of almost 1.5 million in its metro area, and realistically, it would also become the dominant team in the Tulsa area, which would add about another million people. They would probably need to build a new stadium, but thankfully land and construction in Oklahoma is a bit cheaper than markets like London or Austin. I also feel like this would be less of a gamble for a new owner. There is no doubt in my mind that NFL football would work in OKC. Sure, it might not have the same potential upside as a city the size of London or Mexico City, but it would definitely be a profitable operation with solid fan support. They have had good success so far with the OKC Thunder, and the franchise even announced they don't plan on leaving the city until at least 2050. If they can support an NBA team to that level, there is no reason they can't support the NFL as well. I do think it has some of the same headwinds against it that Portland and Salt Lake City do, which is that they really aren't as big as potential international cities. OKC is a large city, but it's about 1/14 the size of a market like London. The hardest part about getting a team here would be Jerry Jones not losing his mind over the fact there would be a new team even within missile strike distance of Dallas. Unfortunately, he carries a ton of power in the league, and it's possible he would shut it down, but if the NFL really wants to continue to grow, they are going to have to embrace some of these mid-market cities. There aren't many cities left in the United States that don't slightly overlap with a current team's territory. Like it or not, if they add another American team, then some owner out there is going to be frustrated. I think OKC could add some great rivalries to the league, and I think the state of Oklahoma would be very supportive of an NFL franchise. The last American city I want to talk about in this video is another city that seems like a perfect cultural fit for the NFL that just hasn't had the opportunity. Louisville, Kentucky is home to over 1.5 million people in its metro area and currently has no major sports franchises in the entire metro. Some people will say this is because the city is placed in the middle of other major markets, but if the NFL decided to add a franchise here, it would instantly become the most popular team in the market. While other markets of this size usually have at least one professional sports team, the NFL would have a monopoly for professional sports in Louisville. They are relatively supportive of their college football teams and have shown if you are going to be a winner, then they will show up and sell out every game. They do currently have a college stadium with a pretty large capacity, but chances are they would need to construct a new stadium to really attract the attention of the NFL. I do think this would be feasible, but it really comes down to the desire of the population. Anytime you want to build a stadium and public funds are involved, there is always a chance that they don't want to pony up and pay for it. I don't blame cities for not wanting to pay, but I also don't blame the NFL for focusing on cities that will give them free money. I also think Louisville suffers from being stuck between Cincinnati, Indianapolis, and Nashville. All of these markets already have NFL teams, and no matter which way you slice it, the owners of these teams would be a little frustrated losing control over this market. They would probably make the argument that Louisville is too small of a market, but realistically, a potential franchise would absorb most of the Lexington area as well. I think Kentucky is a state that deserves some professional sport representation, and ever since St. Louis lost their team, there has been more room in this region for potential expansion. Maybe the KFC Corporation can sponsor the team and name them the Kentucky Colonels. The last thing I want to do really quickly is go through some cities I see mentioned a lot that I don't think have any shot at actually securing an NFL franchise. I know a lot of people think that St. Louis is probably going to get another team at some point, and honestly, from a purely size perspective, it makes sense for them to have a team. However, after the Rams left, the city entered a lawsuit with the NFL that they ended up winning $1 billion judgment from. This means that the city itself has shown they are willing to sue the league and take big damages from them. If you were the NFL, chances are you would avoid the city that beat you in court. Also, the people of St. Louis are just over the NFL. Now that they've been abandoned twice, there isn't as much demand for it as there used to be. I also see Montreal mentioned a lot when it comes to Canadian expansion, and while it is a big city, I just don't think it has a football culture. The city is much more French than it is Canadian, and they aren't huge fans of the game. I know they have a popular CFL team, but I think the NFL is more likely to put teams in Vancouver and Toronto than Montreal. Montreal also is pretty stingy when it comes to wanting to offer any incentives to sports team, so it's unlikely the NFL would really consider them for these reasons. Plus, they would have to cast everything in French, which we all know would kind of suck. The last one with no possibility is anything in the Oceanic region. I see Sydney and Tokyo brought up a lot, and while maybe it could happen one day decades from now, with current travel capabilities and costs, there is just no way they will be traveling that far for games. Europe is already pushing it heavily, and making it even longer would just turn off a lot of teams wanting to play that entire division. I think it could be doable if there was an entire conference in Asia, but the idea of just 1 or 2 teams in the Oceanic region is way too expensive to come to fruition. Overall, we know that the NFL has expansion on their minds. They have mentioned it clearly several times, and them planning several international games is setting the stage for an eventual expansion. I do think we will see the day where the NFL has 40 or more teams. It may be over the course of decades, but once it can expand internationally, it will happen very quickly. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to press the like button and let us know in the comment section down below what you thought of the video. We post 3 football documentaries a week and would love your support as we try to hit 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year. If you have any cities we missed or you think would be good additions, leave them down below. On screen now, you will see our last video, which was about the life of Pat McAfee. Thank you all so much for watching.